Hey guys, this is Chevy JP86 back again with another episode of Extreme Gaming, and on this episode I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about the Super Nintendo, also known as the SNES or the Super Famicom system back in Japan. So yeah, let's get to it. I got a traditional North American Super Nintendo. Now this baby was awesome. I remember actually getting this probably the first, well, it was the first year it came out. I actually got it, and it came out in August of 1991. And I remember it very, very clearly because my dad had Super Mario World. He got the Super Mario World package, and that game is so classic. And I mean, everybody that has owned a Super Nintendo or have even played a Super Nintendo must have played Super Mario. It launched in 1991. It actually launched a year earlier in Japan, so I think November 21st of 1990. And it sold for about 25,000 yen, which equals out to about 200 or 210 American. So they were going for a bit of money back then, but for a good reason. This thing could do so much, like so much in the ways of graphics compared to the older systems. And I mean, Genesis was still on par with the Super Nintendo at the time, but Genesis didn't boast the sound processor like the Super Nintendo did because it had an actual Sony chip in there. And there's a whole backstory behind that. Sony was actually going to go team up with Nintendo, and then Sony finally just said, screw it, we're going to do our own. So that's when they brought out the PS1. But no, Nintendo did really, really well with the SNES, and it's actually world-renowned by millions of people for one of the best gaming consoles of all time. And I mean, the North American version of the Super Nintendo, it's, you know, it's a little bigger than the Famicom, I believe. The Famicom is a little more rounder on the edges, like right around here. And the buttons actually, they're a little bit different right here. They have more or less just like a switch. These are switches too, but the switches that I'm talking about, they actually extend out and they kind of go up like a light switch. These ones are, they just slide up and down, which is also good. And the center was different. It had like a button in the center, but it didn't actually have the indentation like this one does. And also, the North American model has these little tabs in here on each side. You guys, well, you can't see them, but they have these tabs, and that's really the difference between the North American model of the SNES and the Japanese Famicom. And really, if you seriously, if you take out those tabs, you can play Famicom games in your SNES. So you don't really have to go out and buy a Famicom to play Super Famicom games. You could just for the vintage aspect, but I mean, you don't have to. But yeah, no, this baby took off, and I mean, the Sega was good, and I owned a Sega back in the day first, like myself. I got it for my birthday, and I got the Sonic 2 pack with the Model 2 Genesis, and I loved Sonic back then, and I was just so stoked to have it. But then, I mean, over the years, I was just like, I want to get a Super Nintendo eventually, so I pretty much stole my dad's, meaning I took it out of the living room, put it in my room, I was playing Donkey Kong, and, you know, I was just right into Super Nintendo. And then don't get me freaking started on Final Fantasy. I played Final Fantasy 2, and I was hooked ever since I was about 10 years old to now, to Final Fantasy. So this really got me started with the Final Fantasy series. And that's really, you know, overall, that's what really won my heart over for Nintendo, was its really massive base of RPGs, and then playing Zelda and just stuff like that. That really got me. And I mean, don't get me wrong, I love Sega. I loved the Phantasy Star series, the Shining Force, Sonic, just all that stuff, Streets of Rage. But the Super Nintendo really is what this is my main core of a console back in the 90s, was this one. So, I mean, if I had to pick between either one, Super Nintendo would definitely be on my list for top. The cool thing about this one is that even when I got my PlayStation 1, I still wanted to have one of these. And that's the thing. It was successful all the way up into the 32-bit era. And I think they discontinued making the SNES in North America in 1999. And even other places in the world, they stopped making them like in 2003. So I mean, it had a long lifespan. It was good. But yeah, no, and the thing that really won everybody over in the end, over Sega to Super Nintendo, was that the SNES really was dominant with the role-playing games. Everybody wanted to play role-playing games. And that's why it had stellar titles like Final Fantasy II, for example. Like I said earlier, this is what got me into the series. And that is what hooked everybody onto a game console, was games like this, because it took you a while to get through these, but at the same time the storylines were so compelling, they drew you in. They wanted to keep you there, right? Whereas, you know, not everybody wants to play a fighting game over and over, or for example, Streets of Rage. Don't get me wrong, I love Streets of Rage. Love the game. But I mean, there's only so much of that you can play over and over, right? So I mean, when games like this are coming out back to back, Secret of Mana, Chrono Trigger, Final Fantasy III, you name it, Star Ocean, just all that good stuff is coming out back to back on the Super Nintendo, and the Sega just didn't get as much of that over here on the Genesis as the Super Nintendo did. So that's really why the Super Nintendo prevailed in the end. The Sega still had a huge share of the market, but I mean, overall, Super Nintendo took the cake. But yeah, no, it was an amazing console, and I'm so glad that I got it in my. They brought out the smaller version of the SNES. This is the SNES Junior, and this thing, I mean, they cut a little bit out. I mean, it only does regular composite. It doesn't have S-video like the other one was capable of. So it wasn't. I mean, that wasn't a huge thing for a ton of people. I mean, a lot of people still use the RF, which is pretty primitive technology now. But I mean, if it mattered to you, I guess you would want to go with the bigger one rather than the smaller one. But at the same time, this is kind of a neat little model of the Super Nintendo, just to collect, right? This came out, I believe, '97, and this was like their last little console they were going to come up with until they pulled the plug completely. But I mean, this, like I said, it had a long run, and it's kind of neat. There's the front of it, and then bottom. Like, I mean, it's a small console. I'll put them up side by side here. That's what you're looking at. This thing's a beast compared to this little guy here. But I mean, that was what kept the lifespan of the SNES going, was the redesign of it too, because a lot of people thought it was a sleek look, and it was. And it, like I said, it kept it going well into the 32-bit era. Here's a little look at the controller on the SNES. That's a regular North American controller. I believe the Super Famicom controller is. I think they have different colored buttons here, and pretty much everything else is the same. I think actually even the actual cord that goes into the system is the same. The family computer, though, the Famicom, the original Nintendo in Japan, I think it had the controllers connected to it. They didn't come out. It was just came with two controllers. That was it. And then there's other devices for the Super Nintendo that came out for games such as Mario Paint. You had the mouse, which I also have right here. But yeah, guys, basically that's all I wanted to show you, is just my little outlook on the Super Nintendo system, and what I think, all my thoughts on the Super Nintendo console, and really just an overall review of the system. I mean, it was such a good system for back in the day, and I mean, people to this day still play this console. So I mean, you're looking at a guy that plays it right now. I'm still playing the console. I have lots of games for it, and I'll go over them soon. But anyways, guys, Chevy JP86, and I really appreciate you guys for watching my videos. Thank you. Take care.